Estamos hablando con Timothy Smith, más conocido como TV Smith, que va a estar tocando el año que viene con los Damned, en la gira que van a hacer los Damned aquí en Argentina y en otros países también de acá de Sudamérica. Si bien tu nombre es Timothy, todo el mundo te conoce como TV Smith. Me gustaría saber de dónde sale ese apodo que te acompaña hace tanto tiempo.
Well, I started calling myself TV because of the adverts, really. You know, that was the joke was, you know, the adverts were on TV all the time. TV was in everybody's house. My surname Smith is the most common name in Britain, so I just thought I'd make myself sound really ordinary. You know, stars, pop stars are supposed to have exotic names, and you know, I thought, well, I'll go the opposite way and I'll just call myself something really stupidly everyday that's in everybody's homes all the time.
Tim, naciste en Devon, un condado del sudoeste de Inglaterra. ¿Cómo te iniciaste en la música y de qué manera llega el punk rock a tu vida?
Well, just one small correction is I was actually born just on the outskirts of London, and my parents moved down to Devon when I was 9 years old. So really my teenage years were spent in Devon, and most of my memories are from living in the countryside. But you know, I got hooked to music. You know, I started writing poetry, and then I started writing songs when I was just a young kid, and I had a band at school, and you know, then I went to art college for a year down here in the West Country, and then I started another band there, and we even pressed up our own record, made 50 copies of the record. That was a band called Sleaze. And so music became my life really early on. And but what I did realize was that in Devon, in the countryside, there was no way of going forward with a band. You know, no one was interested in new music. They just wanted to listen to old cover bands, much like it is now, actually. And so when I first heard about the Sex Pistols really starting up in London, you know, and I'd heard about the Ramones already, and I just had this feeling something exciting was coming, and I knew I couldn't remain in the West Country. You know, I had to move to London because that was obviously where it was going to start. That's where the Sex Pistols were starting. You know, we'd already heard about the Clash starting there. So in 1976 I moved up to London because I knew my band had to start there.
Con tu pareja de ese entonces, Gay Black, más conocida como Gay Advert, se mudan a Londres y fundan una de las primeras bandas punk de fines de los 70s. ¿Qué recordás de la primera época de The Adverts?
Well, I remember that it started from year zero, really. You know, I had to start a completely new band. Gay said she wanted to learn bass guitar, so which was fine because I had the songs, but I didn't know how to play bass guitar either. So I taught her how to play bass guitar on my acoustic guitar, just using the bottom 4 strings. And so she learnt the songs. Then we looked for a guitarist and a drummer, and that took a few months. But there was no real scene at all. You know, there was talk of the Sex Pistols. We saw the Sex Pistols play. We went to the 100 Club punk concert in the summer of '76. But it was only really when the Roxy Club opened up in January 1977 that there was a place for anyone who wanted to play punk rock to play. So I phoned up the manager of the Roxy and asked for a gig, and at the same time a friend of mine got us a gig. We ended up playing twice in the first week that the Roxy was open. People came to the Roxy Club. There was suddenly a lot of interest in the press, and punk rock just kind of exploded in Britain within a few weeks, really, at the beginning of 1977. So it was a very, very fast kind of start, a real kickstart to punk rock.
Crossing the Red Sea with the Adverts fue aclamado por crítica y público. ¿Tenían noción en este momento de lo importante que era este disco?
I don't think anyone knew or thought about being important. You know, the only thing I cared about was making the best record I could. You know, and I was really happy with the way the record sounded. But no one on the punk rock scene thought that nearly 50 years later people would still be interested in talking about punk rock. You know, the idea wasn't to create some kind of iconic album. It was just to make an album that captured the band. That's all we cared about at the time.
Su siguiente trabajo, Cast of Thousands, fue bastante más experimental y muy diferente al primero. ¿Fue una decisión consciente de parte del grupo o una evolución natural de su música?
Well, the only thing about Cast of Thousands that was different really was that it was the second album, because the first album was also really experimental for us. You know, we were writing, you know, I was writing the kind of songs that weren't usually in the punk scene, and the musicians involved weren't used to playing that kind of music with the time changes, you know, and unusual chord sequences. So Cast of Thousands was actually not that different. It was just a different sound, you know. I didn't want to make the same record twice, so I thought Crossing the Red Sea was already perfect the way it was. So I was writing different kinds of songs, and we wanted to move on. We wanted to make something new, not Crossing the Red Sea Part 2. So I thought it was a natural thing to move on and do something different. The trouble was that by that time, punk rock had become rather conservative, and people wanted to hear the same thing again. So people were starting to think that every band should be like the Ramones, where every record sounds the same. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something new and creative and exciting that stimulated me.
Tuviste varios grupos posteriores a Adverts, como los Explorers y Chip, y nunca quisiste volver a reunir a tu primera banda. Imagino que habrás tenido propuestas para juntar a Adverts. ¿Cuál es el motivo de tu negativa eterna a esa reunión?
Well, I didn't actually have that many proposals to reform the Adverts. Everyone thinks, well, there must have been a huge interest and everyone wanted to hear the Adverts, but actually the Adverts finished because people didn't like the Adverts anymore. You know, the second album was a commercial disaster. There were less and less people turning up to gigs, and it felt like a band that had reached the end of the road, which is why I moved on and started other bands. You know, and by the time people started saying, well, we'd like to hear the Adverts again, it was too late. You know, Howard, the guitarist, died a few years after the end of the band. Laurie, the drummer, disappeared and moved to Iceland, so he wasn't around. Gay put down her bass guitar the last day of the band and never played again. So there was no Adverts to reform. So the question, why no more Adverts, is, you know, it's not one I can't answer, because the Adverts finished. And I know a lot of punk bands, they reformed without any original members or with just one original member. But I you know, to me that was a kind of a cheat, so I never did it. Instead, you know, when enough years had passed for people to realise it wasn't going to be the original band, I formed a band called the Bored Teenagers to play the Advert songs, and just recently I've done a couple of tours as TV Smith's The Adverts, because I know now everybody knows it's not going to be the original four-piece lineup. But for a while there, I just thought, I don't want to touch the Adverts anymore. The Adverts are over.
En los 90s iniciás una gran carrera solista con un gran disco como es March of the Giants. Mayormente tus presentaciones son solamente voz y una guitarra acústica, siendo reconocido como el trovador del punk. ¿Cómo se pasa del punk eléctrico y visceral de los 70s a shows completamente acústicos?
Well, actually March of the Giants was, I guess it was my second solo album, but the first solo album, Channel 5, in the 80s, that was an electric album. So March of the Giants was actually my first attempt to do an acoustic album, because, and the reason was that I just had my band Cheap, which I really loved. You know, they were a bunch of friends, and we toured around the country trying to get little gigs. We made a record, but I couldn't get the record released. So I felt I was banging my head against a wall with an electric band. So I decided to try something different, which was the acoustic you know, having a record full of acoustic instruments, you know, I'd never used on a record before, unusual percussion and a whole load of instruments I'd never tried before, to try and kind of have a different instrumentation on an album. And it was really exciting for me to work that way. And soon after that, a friend of mine, Attila the Stockbroker, who's a punk poet in England, asked me why I don't try playing an acoustic gig, because he told me I've been playing acoustic gigs all my life, solo. You write songs, he said, why don't you go on stage on your own and try playing a gig all on your own? And I said, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. You know, I've always played in bands. He said, go on, I'll put on a gig. You just come along and bring a guitar and try it. And I tried it that one time and I was completely hooked. You know, I really loved the thrill of just standing there on a stage with my guitar, singing my songs to an audience who was standing right in front of me. You know, no escape, no hiding behind the lead guitarist while he plays his solo, just totally 100% there on stage. So I became really addicted to that idea of playing solo and acoustic, and that's how it started.
Has sido asiduo colaborador de Die Toten Hosen. ¿Cómo se conocieron y de qué modo empezaste a componer canciones junto a ellos?
I'd never actually heard of the Toten Hosen until in the 1980s they came to Britain to make their Learning English record. And then Arturo, from the bassist from the Lurkers, rang me up and said, there's this German band in London. I was still living in London at the time. And they want to come and they want you to come over and do a cover version of Gary Gilmore's Eyes with them. And I thought, well, that sounds a bit like it's going to be a bit shit. But he drove me over to the studio to see them. And they'd already recorded their version of Gary Gilmore's Eyes, which they wanted me to sing on. And I found really nice people, really, really authentic about their love for punk rock. And I realized it was a genuine, you know, these guys were genuine about their love for punk rock. They'd done a great version, so I agreed to sing on it. And we just got on really well. You know, we became good friends. And after they played in Argentina, I think it was after their gig in Buenos Aires, they did a tryout of a song called Pushed Again when they didn't really have the lyrics ready. But they came back and Campino called me and said they've got this great song that they're sure is going to be a hit, and they wanted to have English lyrics to it. So we worked together on the lyrics for Pushed Again. And we worked together really well, you know. And then I did a whole load more of English translations for them for their Crash Landing album, which was released in Australia. And we continued working together after that. And you know, they put a few of my records out on JKP, and we remain in contact.
En 2002 grabás Useless, un compendio de grandes éxitos con los Toten Hosen como banda de apoyo. ¿Cómo fue la experiencia de tener semejante banda tocando canciones de todos tus discos?
It was a really great experience, you know, and it was part of the collaboration thing that we were just talking about, was that after, you know, I'd worked on the lyrics for Pushed Again, I was having a chat with Campino, and he said, you know, you've got all these great songs, all recorded in different studios, in different styles. You know, how would it be to have, you know, us as a consistent band recorded in one studio, in one session with a great producer? You know, he asked me if I'd like to do that, and I said, well, let me think about it. Yes, you know. And to be honest, you know, we'd had a few drinks, and I thought the next day he'd probably forget about it. But the next day, when we recovered from the hangover, he still wanted to do it, and we talked about it with the rest of the band, and they all wanted to do it as well. So you know, shortly afterwards, we went into the studio in Germany with John Caffrey producing, a great studio. And I finally got a chance to record with my mate Vom on drums, one of his earliest projects with Die Toten Hosen after he joined. And it was really just one of those dream studio sessions. You know, everything went totally well right from the start. And I really think, you know, we produced a really good album there.
Además de tu idioma natal, hablas perfectamente alemán. ¿De qué modo se dio el proceso de aprendizaje de ese idioma?
When I was not very popular in Britain, you know, I had a whole period in the 80s and some of the 90s where I could hardly even get a gig in Britain. But I got, you know, I had this connection with the Toten Hosen, and I'd had a few friends of mine in Germany had invited me over to play acoustic gigs in Germany, and I just really got the feeling I had a connection with Germany. You know, the audiences liked what I did. They were asking me about the lyrics, and I wasn't able to explain to them. I had friends who would have conversations, and they'd have to keep on stopping and translating for me. And I just thought, this isn't good enough. You know, the English have got a really bad reputation for learning other languages, and I really want to learn German and be able to explain a bit about my songs from the stage and chat with friends and not be the stupid English man who can't speak another language. So I worked hard at it, and over the years, it's you know, it's I can speak pretty good German now. But that's how it came about. And my next ambition is to learn Spanish. Comprendo.
Bien, bien, very good. A principios de este año editaste tu último disco titulado Handwriting. ¿Es difícil encontrar inspiración después de tantos años de escribir canciones?
The simple answer is no, because what's always inspired me for songwriting is, you know, looking at the world and seeing what I think's wrong and what I would like to think happen. And to me, the world is just getting worse, you know, politically, you know, the lack of compassion people have got for each other, the lack of understanding, the greed, you know, the anger, the war, all this just seems to be getting worse and worse all the time. So, you know, when I started handwriting, it was just a question of looking around and seeing, you know, the subjects were there. They were already there to be written about, and I just had to kind of like pull them out of the air and write about them.
En 2023 editaste un disco junto a Richard Strange titulado A Different World. ¿Qué nos podés contar acerca de ese proyecto?
Yeah, that was an interesting project actually, because Richard and I originally wrote some songs together around the time I was also writing Cast of Thousands, and by that time already the adverts were in quite a bad way, getting towards the end of their career, and Richard's band, the Doctors of Madness, was also getting towards the end of their career, and we found a kind of like place to go by writing together where we could really understand what we were doing without the pressure of our bands falling apart around us. So we had a very nice creative time writing this batch of songs in 1978, and but it was all done on a 2-track tape recorder at his house. There was no room for any mistakes or overdubs or anything. So we've stayed in contact over the years, and we are very good friends. And a couple of years ago, we released those original cassettes for Record Store Day here in Britain on a 12-inch album. And we thought about it and thought, well, the technology was so primitive when we made that record. Why don't we record it again now with all the technology, you know, we have to hand? You know, it's so easy now to record at home. You need a computer, you know, you need a keyboard, you got the guitars, and you know, we can make a record to a much better quality than we did in 1978. So we thought, why not revisit those songs, re-record them again, write a few new ones all together as well, and put them out on CD.
En 2013, precisamente, visitaste por primera vez Argentina tocando junto a Duncan Reid de The Voice. ¿Qué recuerdos tenés de esa primera vez en nuestro país? Y ese año grabaste una versión de tu tema Immortal Rich junto a Pil y los Violadores de la Ley. ¿Cómo surgió esa colaboración tan especial?
Yeah, well, I have really fond memories of good memories of playing in Argentina last time, which is, it's one of the reasons I'm so happy to be coming back. I've hoped to come back to Argentina for many years since the last time I was here, but of course it's a long way from Britain. That's the problem, and it's been waiting for a good opportunity to come back. And obviously the gigs with the Damned are the perfect chance to come back and see you all in Argentina. I made a lot of friends, met a lot of people, felt I was very much on the same wavelength as the Argentinian people and my friends I made there. So it was a really nice experience, and I'm very much looking forward to coming back. And of course there was this the contact with Pill, who has also worked with Die Toten Hosen, so there was already a connection with Pill, and my friend Mariano, who I think was managing Pill at the time, suggested we work together on a song of mine, The Immortal Rich. So while I was on tour last time, we popped into the studio for a few hours and worked on that, and that was a very nice experience too. So basically, I do feel a strong connection with Argentina, and I'm really looking forward to coming back.
Vas a estar tocando nuevamente en Argentina junto a los Damned, a quienes conoces desde aquellos lejanos 70s compartiendo giras. ¿Qué expectativas tenés para este regreso y qué tipo de shows vas a estar brindando?
Yeah, I've known the Damned for a long time, and of course our first tour in '77 was the Adverts and the Damned together, 30 dates in Britain, which was, that was a long tour for a band that 6 months ago didn't even exist. So there's this very strong connection. Of course, there was the famous Damned Adverts poster saying the Damned can play 2 chords, the Adverts can play 1, come and see all 3 at, and then the name of the gig. So, we do have this strong connection. And of course, in the meantime, the Damned have become very good musicians. I can play more than 1 chord now. And so I think we're all going to be quite, the idea that we're young punk bands who can't play, that's gone. But I think we're going to both carry the energy of original punk rock with us. The Damned certainly do. The difference for me is that I'm going to be playing on stage solo with my acoustic guitar, but I try and bring the power of a full band to me when I play solo. And I think a lot of people tell me that if you close your eyes, you think it's a real band. So that's the energy I'm going to be hoping to bring onto the stage. And it's going to be interesting for everyone, I think, to see, what's the difference between the Damned and the Adverts in 1977 and the Damned and TV Smith in 2025. I think there's going to be a lot of the energy and the power and the punk rock that's still the same, and there's going to be some things that are different and have moved on and evolved and hopefully got better too. So we're going to see. I think it's going to be great.
Looking through Gary Gilmore's eyes, looking through Gary Gilmore's eyes.